For the history literacy assignment, I have chosen to work on the impact of colonisation on the Aboriginal community. In my talk, I will be covering how Aboriginal people lived before colonisation, during the colonisation, and the effect of British colonisation on Aboriginal people. Before colonisation, Aboriginal people lived according to efficient laws and ways of interacting with the environment to meet their needs. They lived in tribes and they moved from place to place in search of food and water. During colonisation, in the winter of 1791, when George Vancouver claimed the Albany region in Western Australia in the name of King George III, the process of British colonisation began. Initially, the European explorers had reasonably friendly relations with the Aboriginal people. The relationship became hostile when Aboriginal people realized that the colonizers would seriously disturb their lives. Now let's hear from Mr. Dance. Why did they fight? Hello, Mr. Dance.
Hello.
I know you're an Aboriginal and I appreciate how you have spent time with me, especially to answer questions that I've got for you. My first question is, why did they start fighting?
Initially they didn't. Initially when the English landed they were to make friends, and they did. A certain man called Bennelong, he became friends with Captain Arthur Phillip, the governor of the time, and they actually built a little house for him, but they kidnapped him from his tribe rather than just talk. And as a result, when he eventually did escape after about a year, when they finally tracked Bennelong down again and found him, he actually speared Arthur Phillip. Arthur Phillip forgave him because he understood that in his culture you actually have to retaliate as a result. But there's a little thing, it's just up here, it's the Opera House. Bennelong's little house that the English built for him was actually where the Opera House is today. So at first it was about talking and learning from one another, and they actually used the Aboriginals with trade and food and many things like that. It wasn't just straight out conflict. Conflict came a little bit later, particularly as they progressed over the mountains into some of the bigger tribes and started land clearing and taking land. So, yep.
The most immediate consequence of the British settlement was the appearance of European diseases. Most were epidemic diseases such as chickenpox, smallpox, influenza, and measles. Consider what it would be like to see a previously unknown disease with a 50% fatality rate sweep through your community, affecting your family and friends. Another consequence of British settlement was the reduction of access to land and water resources. The settlers took the view that Aboriginal people with a nomadic lifestyle could easily be driven away from their lands. Imagine how you would feel if you welcomed strangers into your house and they never left. In fact, what would it be like if they took control of your house and made you relocate far, far away? What if they abused you physically and financially and spread disease throughout your community? Can you imagine how this would affect your children and grandchildren's view of these strangers for generations to come? Mr. Dance shared with me his family members' personal experiences being in the British colony. Any experiences that your family ancestors had?
Yes. So on my dad's side, my dad's mum, her dad was my grandma's dad, great-grandfather, I suppose. He was Aboriginal, but he was taken when he was really little and put on kind of a mission, it was called there. They took him from his mum, who was kind of told from a little age that he wasn't really wanted, and he found out much later that was a lie. his mum did want him, but they just took him because they didn't see his mum as capable of bringing him up, because he wasn't being brought up in the English way, I suppose. And then he was adopted out of the mission at a later date into a family, and I'm pretty sure he ended up training horses for races, and he was very good at that, but still probably quite a difficult life from the little bits that I get from my nana. And then she herself, because she had quite dark skin, she used to get teased a lot because she was going to school, just because of the colour of her skin or the way that she would talk. So some interesting little parts there, and I think she only went to, not many people did go far, but I think she only went to year 6 back then, and she hated school, couldn't stand it. That's what I've gathered from her as I've grown up.
Thank you, Mr. Dance.
No problem.
In order to know how that feels as a child, I have interviewed a senior member of the Aboriginal community. Linda was taken into the care when she was a child. Now, let's hear her experience of being a child in the British colony. Today, I have Mrs. Linda Holland with me. She is one of the senior members of the Aboriginal community and witness and victim of colonisation. I'm privileged to talk with you, Linda. I sincerely thank you for your time. My project is on the impact of colonisation on the Aboriginal community. I would like to just start with the introduction. Linda, would you please introduce yourself with your Aboriginal background?
Okay, my name's Linda Holden, and I'm from the Dunghutti people, and the Dunghutti people are from the mid-north coast, and I follow the female line, so my great-great-grandmother was Granny Widders.
I want to know your experience as an Aboriginal child in a British colony.
My experience as an Aboriginal child was that I was in care, my sister and my brother, and my sister and I were returned to our parents, but my brother wasn't. The experience in the care in the St Patrick's orphanage was not a very nice experience for what we had to do, and we had to change from being a spiritual religion to being Catholic. So it meant that we had to get up every morning in the freezing cold in Armidale, and before we had breakfast, we had to go to Mass. And then when we came back, we had just porridge. And then the other part of being a child was that when we went back to our parents, we lived in Aboriginal communities on a number of rivers. And when the welfare would start coming around, we would move at night in our car with just the children and whatever we could fit in the car. And we'd move to another area away from the welfare. So that meant that I didn't have much schooling like you're getting. You go every day. I might go in a couple of weeks to 3 different schools. It just depends.
Are you from a stolen generation?
I'm not from the stolen generation, but my mother was.
What exactly happened when you were taken away from your family?
What happened was that they said that my parents were not able to care for us, and that we should be fostered into a non-white family, because as you can see, I'm not a dark-skinned Aboriginal. I'm what they call a light-skinned Aboriginal. My brother was a dark-skinned, and my sister is a little bit darker than me, and then I'm lighter.
So they took you away?
And my sister and my brother. I actually have a photograph of my brother who was taken away. And he didn't come back to our family and to our parents until he was 18. which is the legal age. But as you can see, it's quite dark.
It is quite hard to see with the black and white photograph, but I can still see it.
Yeah,
Who's that, your sister?
that's my mother, and that's my brother. So he didn't return to us.
From your experience, how did the Aboriginal lifestyle was impacted by the colonisation?
Aboriginal lifestyle was impacted, as I said, when they lost their language, so they weren't allowed to speak their language. The second thing they lost was that they lost their connection to their land. They had the spiritual connection, but not the physical connection. They couldn't just go hunting on their land. The third thing they lost was that they lost their ability to be calling themselves Aboriginal. They were told, when we went into care, we were told we weren't allowed to speak our language, we weren't allowed to refer to ourselves as Aboriginals, we were not allowed to have any connection with the Aboriginal community. So when my parents came to visit, it was always, well, they're doing very well. So we actually didn't see them in the couple of years that we're in care. So we were told that our parents were off drinking somewhere or something like that. It was, they didn't tell us that our parents had come each week to see us.
And the last question is, what a normal Australian can do to restore the community and culture?
What can they do? First, I think they need to acknowledge that we were here first, that we had this rich culture, and how our culture can benefit them. Instead of putting, say, their old people into nursing homes, they could do like we do and take care of them in the home with the extended family. So they could do that. They could acknowledge that they took our land with a treaty, and have a treaty with us so that we can be equals. We're not actually equal. And I think you need to consider that we have a minister for Aboriginal affairs. You don't have a minister for your culture, do you? No. So we're still seen as in need of care. So we have a minister in the government, Australian government, in New South Wales. And in New South Wales, it's Sarah Mitchell. She's a minister for Aboriginal affairs. And at the top level where Mr. Turnbull lives, we have Mr. Skillion. So we have somebody that still wants to take care of us. I still don't think that we can take care of ourselves.
Thank you for sharing your experience and enriching my understanding of the Aboriginal culture and the impact of colonisation on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apart from the information you just saw, Linda also shared a lot of information about how British colonisation impacted their lives. I had a very fruitful 1 hour with her. I hope you also enjoyed this as much as I did. Thank you.